how do you master the craft of the straight line? One of the things that I find interesting that people who don't draw often say is, I could never draw because I can barely even draw a straight line. Well, no one can draw a straight line unless you try, unless you practice, unless you figure out how to do it. It's one of the skills that we master as artists. It's one of the elements of basic pen control. Now, if you want to skip all that, then just use a ruler. It's quite effective at drawing straight lines. On the other hand, if you want to learn how to draw good straight lines freehand, hang around for this video and I'll show you how. Just quickly, my name's Tim Mcburnie. I've been a professional artist for 20 years and a professional drawing teacher for some time. And this idea of teaching people how to perfect their straight lines is something that is interesting and I think a real integral part of learning to draw and learning good pen control. The drawing exercise that I think is best for this is what I call the grid challenge, and it's really simple. What we're going to do is draw a variety of grids and use this technique to improve our ability to draw straight lines. But not just our ability to draw straight lines, because again, that is one element of the skill. The most important thing you need to perfect is your ability to draw the right straight line in the right spot. Okay, the first part of this exercise is the two-dimensional grid. And this is as simple as it gets. What we're trying to do is create essentially a square that we then turn into a window. So we start dividing up our grid and we keep dividing it like so. And that really is the fundamental first step that we need to master. You can obviously do this small or big, depending on which one of those skills is the one that you're wanting to develop at this time. Now, the next part of this exercise is where we do the same thing, but we do it with a tilted grid. Now, you can think of this as if you're taking a bit of paper and tilting it up. So if we have a little bit of paper, that would be our flat grid. But often one of the skills that we're trying to perfect is to draw things in perspective. And in this case, what you see is when we take a flat object and we rotate it in space, we get a grid that is kind of tilted. And this is what I would class as the three-dimensional grid. Now, the way that we do this exercise is exactly the same as the two-dimensional grid. It's just that we are creating a tilted plane. So we do the same things. We divide it up. But now what we have to do is start to gauge the directionality of these subsequent internal lines based off the existing lines that we have created. And this is really where that challenge comes in. And this is much closer to the actual type of skill that you're going to need when you're drawing straight lines in the real world. So why is this method so good and so useful? Well, let's look at that in a little bit more detail, but just quickly, if you're interested in improving your line and color illustration, if like me, you're interested in drawing manga and comics or bande dessinée, where we create worlds with simple line and color, check out my free quick start guide. It's a guide I put together to help you master the basics of a simple line and color style in Photoshop. You get all the PSDs and the brushes and the things that I use to create the work that I do in Photoshop. Go check it out. Now, obviously, there is the first skill, which is just how do you actually control your body to draw a straight line? And I'll give you some tips very shortly about how to optimize that. But what I find is that when we're actually drawing in flow, we're actually in the middle of drawing something that we want to draw, the line that we need to create isn't always in that perfect hitting range that we can sort of develop. And you often have to draw multiple straight lines, and they kind of have to be at sort of different angles and stuff. So often the skill that this exercise is trying to build is your ability to kind of get those lines to be straight, but kind of to do them at different angles and at different parts on the page. And most importantly, especially when we're dealing with perspective, what we're doing is we're drawing straight lines that kind of relate to each other on a grid. So that's why, again, we use a grid here, because this mimics one of the primary reasons that we need to draw straight lines. And if you practice doing it this way, and again, lining up these kind of boxes and grids and making sure they look square, that's actually a skill that will be very, very useful in your day-to-day drawing. Now, this exercise is deceptively simple. What I want to do quickly now is talk about how we can get very clean lines and how you can make this exercise easy if this is something that's very challenging to you. And also if you're thinking, hey, Tim, look, I can draw a straight line. Okay, let's try and ratchet up that complexity too, so that you can give yourself a challenge no matter how advanced your drawing is already. All right, so how do we draw a straight line to begin with? There's a number of simple skill building exercises and knowledge items that you can use to improve your straight line drawing ability right off the bat. And the most important one is just to understand the biomechanics of how your body is most effectively going to be able to draw that straight line. And that is at a diagonal. So you notice that generally people will kind of tend to tilt their sketchbook or whatever they're kind of working at, at a particular angle. You have an angle that, tends to kind of be a nice angle that allows your body to kind of just make all those marks and have that freedom. And so the first step is just to position yourself relative to the page in a way that just makes it feel as if your arm and your elbow and your shoulder and your wrist and everything just kind of has good mobility. You're not going to accidentally bang into right, you can see here I'm banging into the side of my chest, and I kind of can't draw, over here, right? Whereas there's an area where you're going to find that your hand is most able to kind of move. And again, even if you're resting on the page, you're just going to find that the tension throughout your arm is lower, and you're going to be able to move. So even if I'm resting my palm on the page to draw something, that's going to be easier to do when it's in that nice hitting range versus kind of off in the corner, right? Even though I'm still drawing with my fingers and it's possible, again, because my whole body's tense, it stops me from making the most effective line. So how does that work with the straight line? Well, what you tend to find is a diagonal. For me, I'm right-handed, so my diagonal is going to be from the bottom left to the top right. If you're left-handed, right, it would probably be the opposite of that. You're going to have a natural kind of diagonal drawing space, and if you draw a straight line on that angle, you're going to be able to get a nice straight line. So how do we apply that when we're drawing things like boxes? Well, you just actually rotate the page until you're going to be able to get the line that you want to create. So if you are trying to create, again, a box, what you would do is just make sure that every line you draw is following that diagonal. And again, that will allow you to get a pretty decent set of straight lines. And that's just going to follow through for all of these other subsequent lines. What you tend to find is if you are just looking at, drawing a series of straight lines, if you just keep rotating that page and you get used to rotating the page, spot the line you need to create, get it in the firing zone, right? And bang, there you go. You just create it. That's how we apply the concept of biomechanics to drawing straight lines. Another really simple, nice drawing exercise that you can use is to draw 2 points on the page and try and connect them up. This is also a drawing exercise that mimics the sort of skills that you're going to need to create when you're actually drawing, right? So instead of just sort of drawing a line and being like, that's where I wanted to put it, if you really think about, no, I got to get one from here to here, and then, you know, what you'll find is you're going to, so you got a little bit off, you're going to have something to aim for. And again, building skills that way is a lot more effective because it's applied to what we actually need to do as artists. Another good straight line drawing technique that, again, you might have seen me do a little bit here is tracing. So that's where, again, we might have 2 dots that we need to connect. And instead of just kind of doing it once, what you can do is to just trace that line. And here you're going to do a couple of things. One is you're just preparing to draw that straight line, so your brain is kind of, you know, figuring it out already. But also you're going to notice if that line that you need to make is kind of rotated on the wrong angle, you can kind of tell that like there's a bit of tension in your body and you probably need to rotate it to a better angle to make sure that you're able to draw it properly. Again, that's the art of tracing before we actually put down a line. Very effective for drawing straight lines and all sorts of other lines too. All right, how do we make this easy for ourselves? If this is something that sounds a little bit challenging and you want to ease into it, there's a number of ways we can make this less challenging and more approachable. The first is to make sure that the lines that we're drawing are a little bit smaller. So if we focus on just these smaller distances, what you'll find is that it's going to allow us to, again, not quite, you know, try and create those long straight lines, but rather little small ones. Smaller lines are easier, smaller grids are also easier. So that's the first way that you can make it easier for yourself. The second way that you can make it a little bit easier on yourself is to just not worry too much about making the lines meet. Focus more on getting the lines parallel to each other. And again, if they sort of go over and cross over each other, or maybe if you don't quite get there, don't worry too much about that. One of the things that you will find that happens a lot when you are drawing freehand and you're trying to do these is that actually if you're going through a point, it's a lot easier to hit it. So before we had, you know, our drawing exercise where I got to get a line from here to here, well, what you'll find is it's actually, you know, a lot easier to just kind of flow through and get close to hitting that second mark. Oh, there it is. If you just kind of make the movement large. And again, that's very acceptable to do because often when we're doing these perspective lines, we're actually doing them as a construction phase. And so people probably aren't going to see that. What we're trying to do is just get the line there to begin with. And later on, what we'll do is go over and sort of either do a secondary drawing pass to trace those lines, make sure they're nice and clean and dark. And again, that can be done slower or in whatever sort of style you want, right? But we know that if I trace that underlying line, I'm going to get a very strong structural base for my drawing. How do we make it harder though? Again, one of the things that I talked about is that if we go with our biomechanics, we're going to make things easier for ourselves. So if we make sure that we're drawing our lines, you know, relative to our body in a nice, effective way, that's going to give us a good start. Well, a good way to make things harder is to not do that. So just place the page, and what we're going to try and do then is not move the page. Instead, we're going to move our body. And again, what you see there is something that very commonly happens is as we draw lines down, I'm actually having to kind of like twist my body like this way to kind of draw that. And I'm working against the natural tension of my hand wanting to go up. So part of what you're going to learn to do by, again, just doing these freehand is how do I deal with that? Now there's multiple ways. One is that, again, I just resist that tension and I know I've kind of got to pull this way, right? The other thing that you could do is actually just move your body, right? So if I move my body but I don't move the page, then again, that's another way of kind of, modifying it as opposed to, moving the page. So all of these things are skills that you will need to use, and what you'll find is that your body will naturally make different decisions based on the data that is there. What you want to do is have options so that when you notice, oh, I've got to draw a line here, my option A is let's move it up here so that I can get a good version of it. Option B would be like, I need to move my body away so that, again, I have a nice free range there. Or again, I need to resist the pressure that's going to sort of push the line up that way. Again, there might be other options that you can develop just by experimenting with that. You might, again, do often a little bit of a mix of both, right? You move the page, you move your arm a little bit, and again, you sort of resist it. But what you're doing is building capacity for your body to kind of understand how to make different marks. And the idea is that the more you do this, the more you'll actually be able to apply those concepts when you're drawing. Because again, you don't always have the ability to draw it, rotate it, and get it exactly in the right spot, right? Often life is complicated, and that's what we want to replicate here. Another thing you can do to make things more challenging is to place these lines at different points along the page. So creating boxes, even though they might be small and relatively easy under normal circumstances, if I kind of place them at a challenging point on the page, that's going to make my body and my hand come up with different solutions in terms of, again, drawing with my fingers over here versus drawing with my sort of wrist and an arm and shoulder if I'm sort of doing the same kind of mark over here. Again, you will also get good at doing things like maybe twisting your arm around to get a particular line depending on where you need it to be. Again, depending on where the line is, there's many different ways that you can actually get that line. So experiment and don't just always try and do it in that perfect hitting range. Again, make it a little bit more complicated for yourself, because that is just building just different hand-eye coordination skill. Just quickly, another modification that you can do to build different drawing skills here is to either do these lines fast or slow. So there's different techniques, and again, you can sort of go with the fast tracing, just one and done line, or you can try and do the same line slowly. Now, as with everything, neither of these methods is right or wrong. They will give you a slightly different look. You tend to see that I personally am a little bit more of a slow, controlled line drawer, and that gives you a little wobble, right? You're never going to get that kind of clean look that you get from having really, really fast hands. And again, having fast and accurate lines is its own challenge that's worth pursuing. But depending on how you approach this, you're going to build different skills, and what you might do is be making it really hard for yourself by doing the thing that you're not as comfortable with, and that, in my opinion, is good, because again, we're just building drawing skills. Another way you can make it more challenging is to use a bigger bit of paper, or just maximize the size with which you are drawing these grids and squares. So if I have to, create a much larger version of this, it's going to make it a little bit more challenging to maintain accuracy. And again, that's part of the challenge. And it's also important because, often when we're doing this, these perspective lines do need to be pretty big. So, often drawing these lines, it is really important to learn how to do them over large distances. But that would be the first thing to do to really kind of tax different elements of your drawing ability is just make this as big as possible and see how you can maintain good line control as you sort of reach the extremities of your body's ability to stabilize the pencil. Another thing that you can do to make this a little bit more complicated and more importantly relate directly to drawing perspective grids is to think about drawing this plane not just as if it's sort of tilted this way, but kind of as if it's sort of tilted a little bit this way. Again, with these things you don't need to know anything about perspective to do any of this exercise, but the skills that we're building here do relate directly to the way that you will draw lines when you do understand and master perspective. But the basic idea here is we need to think about drawing a similar thing, but now as we place in lines we have to calculate these center lines being relative to multiple sort of imaginary vanishing points. Now again, this just makes it a little bit more complicated and relates it a little bit more to actual perspective drawing. Alright, a few questions to end with. The first would be, well, do I actually have to draw the line in one go? And my answer to that would be not really. The goal is straight lines. People often, again, fetishize a little bit the idea of drawing, again, a long straight line. That can be, something that's very sort of useful to do. But there's nothing really wrong with drawing a straight line over sort of multiple steps, let's say. Now, the way that works is that, again, what often happens when you're actually drawing is you go to sort of draw a straight line, and at some point you stop and your brain says, uh-oh, I'm kind of running out of like body tension, I'm running out of room. Maybe you've started pivoting kind of from your shoulder, but you're running out of room, and what's going to happen now is if I continue around, it's going to sort of pull that way. Again, this is often a thing that happens a lot. This would happen in the same way previously you saw me draw a straight sort of cube, and it was that bottom line where you can tell the tension just kind of pushed my pencil up. Same thing here. What you're feeling is you started to draw a straight line, but you can't really finish it easily. So what we naturally do is just kind of rotate the page to the right angle, make sure it's all there, trace that, get it right, and just sort of finish the line. And again, that's a perfectly effective way of drawing a straight line. You can draw a straight line as a series of smaller lines. As long as it's straight, it doesn't really matter. Now, the more you can just draw it straight, the easier your life will be. It's quicker, and it often will give you a slightly more sort of sketchy look. You can see these again, I do them straight like that, but I have seen a lot of people just kind of, chicken scratch their way to straight lines, and there's nothing really right or wrong about any way of drawing. The skill is to make sure it's straight and make sure that you can place it relative to other lines on the page. As long as you can do that, you can draw. The rest is irrelevant. Last question that might pop up is, what about our friend the ruler? Well, I joked about this in the beginning because again, that's often not the skill that people are trying to build, but you can learn a lot about how to draw and how to use a ruler by doing this exercise with your ruler. Now, the reason that this is, not as easy as you might imagine is, okay, sure, just drawing a square is kind of easy with a ruler. And, that's should be obvious. And the accuracy of the straightness of the lines is excellent. But again, remember, when you're actually drawing straight lines, the skill you're often trying to master is, how do I place another straight line relative to other lines? And that's where measuring becomes quite tricky. And what you'll find is it's actually sort of hard for me to gauge, because I'm seeing this little bit and this bit, and it's hard for me to tell, like, where is that line? I sort of take it off, and it's like, now this one and this one aren't actually equal. So being able to place the ruler and understand how to measure with it and measure relative to other lines is actually a very, very important skill to have when you do use a ruler. A few quick tips for using a ruler. Again, if that's something you want to do, what you can often do with a ruler, again, is just get used to drawing quickly with it. You might find again that this is going to be a little bit less accurate from getting everything square point of view, but the more you do this, the more you're just going to build your ability to manipulate it. So the number one sort of thing that I would say is you can use this technique where, again, if I do want to find that angle, right, you place the pencil there first and then you make the mark, right? So that would be the same thing if we're drawing from point to point. Right, if you're trying to draw from point to point, you place the pencil where you need it to be, right, and then draw through the point. Again, that'll get you most of the way there. And again, once you get used to doing that, you'll find that you can kind of, line things up and get things to be pretty effective pretty quickly. And again, practicing doing the grid exercise with the ruler in this manner and really thinking about that will help you to master the skill of the ruler. Because again, you think it's easy, but there's a lot of complexity there as well. All right, so that's it. That's the grid challenge. It's simple, but I think it really should direct you to build skills that are going to be relevant to the actual sort of fun drawing that you want to do. It's also not the type of exercise you can get carried away with. Once you get bored of this, you're bored of it. Go draw something fun, right? This is something you can sort of chip away at, and it'll really tell you, obviously, whether or not your line drawing ability is good or not. You can see whether or not those lines are accurate. And that's really important. You don't want something where you have to kind of always ask someone to teach you, is this okay? Can I draw this perfectly? You can see. You can always see. I can do this exercise and I can be like, you know what? What I want to do is get like a perfect grid. I want it to be big, right? And I want to like make sure every line ends exactly there. I can use this same technique and exercise to perfect my drawing ability forever, right? It's something that will persist and allow you to improve no matter your skill level, and that's why I think it's important. But anyway, that's all I've got. Thanks for watching. Good luck with your drawing. Happy drawing. We'll catch you later. All right, so I've talked a big game. This is how you do this exercise. Let me show you how I would do it. Let's see how accurate I can get. Let's do a simple two-dimensional grid. Draw one line, draw another one, let's draw another one, draw another one. There we go. A little bit wonky. That's all right. Keep going. Maybe I'll give that one sort of a 6 out of 10. Probably being pretty kind to myself. Again, getting a 10 out of 10 is quite a challenge. Let's try a simple rotated grid. There we go. That one's a little bit better. But again, I went over in a couple of those places. Ideally, we get it to stop just there. But that is quite challenging, as I said. Let's try one without moving the page. Again, not bad, a little bit better than the other ones, but still not perfect. keep going.